I'm half Taiwanese and half American, and my dad came over when he was like 13, I think, from Taiwan.
I am that, but the exact opposite. My mom is Taiwanese, and she immigrated here when she was like in 3rd grade. And my dad, he's been here for a long time, his family.
My whole family immigrated here after the Vietnam War to kind of like, you know, escape the living conditions, and they all came here, so I'm first generation.
I'm Black American, I'm Japanese American, I'm German Jewish American too. So I think all those parts are equally important to me.
Both my parents immigrated here. My mom came when she was 13, and my dad when he was like 20.
Both my parents were born in America, and I think 3 out of my 4 grandparents originally immigrated from either China or Japan. But my grandpa, my Japanese grandpa, was born here, and he's the one who experienced like the internment camps and things like that.
Speaking in terms of like former past generations, are there any experiences from your grandparents or parents or great-grandparents that you'd say that can kind of influence like how you view the Asian American community and like other people's actions towards the community?
Definitely internment for the Japanese American community, I think is a huge one. Like my grandpa was interned in Jerome, Arkansas, and my grandma, her family just kind of, not voluntarily, but they moved inwards and just worked on a farm and lived in a train car until the war was over. So obviously it's such a different experience if you were an adult moving your family there, losing everything. And I think the kind of long-term impacts of that, obviously, there's, you know, generational wealth things that were lost. There's also, you know, generational trauma from that and a general kind of feeling of, you know, do you see us as valid Americans and citizens?
In terms of hate crimes, like what would you guys say you've experienced, somebody you know of experience, maybe something you've seen and how it's affected you?
But I had to do Zoom PE classes, and we would have to do these walks and track it on our health app and take a screenshot and then send it. So I was on my walk out in my neighborhood, and this is like my neighborhood's like, I want to say pretty liberal, very like accepting of like everyone. And I'm walking past the elementary school I used to go to, and there's this guy, middle-aged American, like white man, and we're crossing each other on. I have a mask on and he doesn't. This is like peak COVID. And as I'm walking past him, he like takes a step to the side and goes like, and then like says, chink. And I'm like, oh, okay. Like, to me at the time, I was like, okay, just keep walking, right? Because, I mean, in the Bay Area, like, I don't know if I can speak for everyone, but I don't experience that, like, ever, like, any, like, genuine, like, something like that. And that was, like, a very, like, shocking, like, oh, this is, like, that was, like, one of my first, like, eye-opening experiences to blatant racism.
I think especially, like, in high school, so many people throw around slurs, and I think it's very, very normalized, which is extremely, like, it's really sad that it's very normalized, but especially, like, Asian Americans, we don't say anything about it, and, like, as youth, obviously, if you don't say anything about it now, it just continues to grow in the people that say it.
I was very worried for my mom's mom because she lives in like these like apartment buildings, and it's just where a bunch of like old Chinese people live. It's like a whole apartment building full of just old Chinese people. And I was worried about her because I would see it happen to other people, like maybe on the news or something. And I think just thinking about it in a wider scope, I think the way COVID affected me most was seeing all the racism that happened towards people who look like my grandma, look like maybe one of your grandmas. It's like, it makes me think about past instances of racism towards Asian people, Chinese Exclusion Act, something like that, internment camps. And you question how much progress has actually been made, because it's like, oh yeah, but that was in the past, but like, is this a reflection of that?
I'm taking U.S. history, so we're kind of going through all the immigration, and then learning about all the immigration and all the government policies that were made to keep out Asians, of course it's not necessarily the same, but then it kind of makes you question like the feeling towards Asian Americans. Like, has it really changed since Asians first started immigrating towards the US? Because we really, when you think about it and you analyze it and kind of compare, there's not much of a difference between what happened then and what's happening now.
I mean, the underlying like constant is that there's a belief that we're not American. You know? I feel like so much of being Asian American is this weird like in between where you're being used often as like a racialized weapon against other minorities, but you are still a minority. You're still like a person of color. So you're always in this awkward in between. I mean, even just like being considered American, but also at the same time, never fully American. It's just so much like you learn to occupy this really awkward like in between in your experiences.
Kind of us as youth, is there anything that you think that specifically that we could do to kind of raise more awareness for the AAPI community?
Just listen to other people's stories, you know. They're definitely out there. There is no lack of Asian people telling their stories or Asian Americans writing poetry about it or making art about it.
A lot of us are taught not to talk about like our experiences and not talk about, or just like not take up space, whether it's like physically, emotionally, socially, etc. And so taking the step towards talking about your experiences and sharing, I think, is a step we can all take, even if it's a little uncomfortable sometimes.
Because I think social media is like also one of the ways how like stereotypes and slurs, I think it's like a very big part of how it spreads so quickly and so easily. And I think social media is also a good platform to try to use to share experiences.
Youth definitely have a role in trying to like mobilize against specifically like critical race theory bans that are happening in different parts of the country. I know in like California that's not a big issue for us, but you know, across the country, like history is basically being erased, and that's such a dangerous thing. Like not only for Asian Americans, but for like all minorities and just everyone who won't understand, you know, the systemic racism that still exists today. So I think it's really important for, you know, youth to use their voice, students to use their voice, mobilize, like advocate for their own education, even like us who have that privilege to, you know, have a pretty representative education or just at least have legislation that protects that more.
What in a school setting do you think can be done?
It's so important to have like for us to learn in school like all this history that shapes what Asian America looks like today. You know, like I think the very first thing is just having curriculum that teaches us like why it's like all of this as it is now because of all of this that has like led up to it. And I think having that understanding, like even starting very young, like I think it's really important just to understand like why is this like not a word you should use, what has shaped that to happen, and why like all the history that makes up like our experiences now.
I feel like we tend to like kind of repress our experiences and our feelings towards people and slurs and kind of like the blatant racism that we experience or we see other people experience or we kind of see online. And I think that like a big part of it is us making the change to be able to be open to sharing our experiences to other people and being able to like really connect with other people, not specifically like other Asian Americans, but even like maybe our friends of other races, to be able to maybe like relate to other experiences they have had within like their ethnicities and like problems they may have had, or maybe share similarities or differences between cultures.
We're taught from such a young age to like keep our head down, work hard, don't talk about all these things we're going through, and so that really feeds into why we like you use the word repress a lot, like why we repress all these things and don't necessarily speak out about it or just accept as is.
I think people also like start to compare oppressions and say, well, what you're going through isn't as bad as, you know, this other group, which is just so harmful because, you know, we need to realize that like Black liberation is also Asian American liberation. Like Asian American liberation is also like Indigenous liberation. Like they can coexist, like they should coexist.
And I think especially in the past few years, you have hate crimes against Asian Americans and you have the Black Lives Matter movement. And then I think those two, especially occurring at the same time, they seem very like I think people tend to compare the two a lot when they're really not similar at all, but they have similarities in the way that they're both issues that need to be faced. And like progression towards one goal is progression towards the goal as an entirety, like you were saying, because you're right, like racism does encompass all racism towards all races. It's not specifically like Black people, it's not specifically Asian Americans. Like I think that like at the end of the day, like I think we all need to realize kind of to connect, not necessarily compare, and be able to like progress together and not try attempt to progress in our own little groups.
In the future, like I'd love if American didn't immediately jump to like a white American. Like it's sad that it has to be that way. Like if you're a whitewashed Asian, like, you know, you're closer to the proximity of being an American. But you know, like America is a land of immigrants and of indigenous people. So I just think I mean, it's because of, you know, white supremacy that, you know, we view American or the ideal American, the all-American as like, you know, a white person.
We shouldn't have any default view of what American might be, and we shouldn't question people because they might not look what you view as American. And if there were just no like implicit biases as what an American might be, or just stereotypes or an idea, a default, that would be amazing for the future.